Reflections with Marilyn Baker. Brought to you by Torch Trust, the Christian organisation with a vision for people with sight loss.
Hello and welcome to Reflections from Torch Trust, the show that focuses on faith and disability in today's world. I'm Marilyn Baker and it's wonderful to have your company. Here we are on the third Sunday in Advent, and time is flying by this December, isn't it? These last couple of weeks, we've been thinking about the different meanings of Advent. Week 1, we prayed for hope. Last week, we prayed for peace. And this week, we're praying for the joy which comes through Jesus' arrival and through the salvation he has gifted us. Let us pray a short prayer to help us start this week's programme. Heavenly Father, fill our hearts with the joy that comes from knowing your love. May we rejoice in the good news of salvation and share that joy with others during this season of Advent. Amen. Let me tell you about this week's guest, who is the brilliant comedian, writer and broadcaster Paul Kerensa. If you were listening to Reflections last week, you would have heard him talk about his health and him speaking about how identifying from being able-bodied to disabled. You can hear that over on the Torch Trust website, torchtrust.org. This week, Paul will be talking about his eyesight, his love of history, and how that turned into a podcast. And of course, Christmas.
Reflections from Torch Trust.
Let's talk about your site.
Okay. Oh, yes.
Because the Torch Trust is very much about learning and sharing information on eye conditions. So just tell us what you have or what you had.
So I've had a condition called keratoconus for several decades now. I think it's a condition that more often affects younger men in their sort of late teens and 20s. Though it does affect people of all ages and genders and things. But that's when it got me, and it's essentially the cornea in the eye sort of distends, becomes a bit more conical. So it distorts, and light, particularly, you get quite sensitive to light. So I've worn glasses since I was 5, but the lens was just not really fixing as much as it used to. And then over time, the lens was fixing really nothing at all. And it was getting a bit too bright. And then you try hard contact lenses, but there's only a certain number of years you can put those hard lenses on this kind of distending cornea because it's kind of poking out. So they manage it for as long as they could. And ultimately then I needed a corneal transplant. So I've had 2 corneal transplants now. So I'm delighted to be wearing the cornea of a 65-year-old woman, and I'm very grateful to her. I don't know who she was, but I'm very grateful she signed up to the organ donor register. Cornea isn't an organ as such, but it's on the register list, of course. And I know for a fact a lot of people who do the organ donor thing, they get the box and they go, yep, pancreas, put me down for some heart, lung, cornea, eyes. I'm not sure about eyes. And people often don't tick that box. And I know of several people whom that's the case. But my eye surgeon was like, no, you must encourage people, tick the box. So I encourage people, people, you don't need them anymore. Let's spread them around a bit. So so that's where I'm currently at, with still a lot of blur in the left eye. So the right eye for me does all the work, but the left eye is better than it was with its new cornea. I'm well aware as a comedian, the last thing I should get is cornea. But there you go. That is life.
Oh, that's a great pun. Well done, Mr. Kerensa. You had to slip that in.
It wasn't. I haven't had all this work just for that pun, by the way.
No, obviously.
I want to make that really clear.
And what about treatment and prognosis for things like that? Is it more surgery? Is it something that might kind of come back if left untreated?
Yeah, and it sort of has really. I mean, like I say, my left eye's not perfect. My sort of surgeon, he looked to me recently and was like, oh, it's not quite as good as we'd hoped, because it didn't reject as such, but the first cornea they gave me didn't quite work out as they'd hoped. So they did a different cornea and we're still not quite at perfection. But he has referred me now. Apparently if I do, you can get some special contact lenses that bed it in, make it a bit better, kind of push it all down. So that's the next step. So I'm still on the quest to see if we can improve that condition a little more. But, everything deteriorates. I'm mid 40s now, bladders, corneas. I'm waiting for the next thing to, fall off or whatever. I don't know. We roll with it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being quite honest and putting that out there and sharing all those conditions. I know it's not something I ordinarily ask you to do, so thank you for sharing that.
Well, thanks for asking. It's. I feel I should share it more. You see people who do share about their conditions and things. I was watching The Traitors last year with, was it Molly, who had a stoma? I think, yes, get out there, show off your stomas and all that sort of thing. But it is trickier, I think, with bladders and corn. No one has a clue when they see me walk by. So that's why, as a comedian, sometimes I can dwell on those things just to have a little chance to talk about them, because you don't want to come across as, even without that, I'm not perfect. I'm ginger, I've got glasses, but you have. I think it's good to show that vulnerability more and more, and I think we are as people, aren't we? I think so. Yeah. So thanks for the chance.
No, thank you. Let's talk about the things you love, because you're an author turned historian and podcaster. Your British Broadcasting Century podcast is something which has taken off recent years. Tell us a little bit how that all came about and what it is for anyone who is unaware.
Yeah, so I like cultural history, I think it's fair to say. And I think as a writer, if you spend that long writing a book or making a podcast or a radio thing, or, I spent years pitching different ideas and things, and you realize that why waste your life spending all this time writing a pitch for a thing that only 3 people would ever read, commissioners glance at it, put it in the bin, whatever, and you've spent a year of your life doing that. So you should go where your interests are. So I wrote a book on the history of Christmas, Hark, the Biography of Christmas. And while researching that and the first broadcast Christmas, I read that statistic that the BBC first launched at the BBC's first Christmas in 1922. It had 30,000 listeners, but only 4 employees. And I thought, who are those 4? And did they get along? And I spent the last few years looking into that origin story, realizing that no, they didn't get along, but also that their own origin story is fascinating. And those firsts of broadcasting that actually many have not really looked into, because you get media historians who focus on one bit, but actually via a podcast and a stage I've been doing, it's a chance to then look at and recreate the first drama, the first comedy, the first children's program, the first song, all of these firsts that we now take for granted. We turn on our TVs, radios, whatever it might be, and enjoy. But someone did it first, and I wanted to find out who. So that's my quest.
What's the oddest thing you've learned on that journey of researching the BBC so far?
The oddest thing, gosh, there's so many really little quirks that you find. Probably the major one, I suppose. I always love it when I find a thing that looks like no one else has found in the last 100 years, which is quite nice. I think looking into the first dramatist for broadcasting, the first radio playwright, really was quite a fascinating one for me, because there's a woman called Phyllis Twigg who's been kept out of the history books, been replaced by this bloke called Richard Hughes, who did, in fairness, Richard Hughes wrote the first play for grown-ups in 1924. But there's just one mention of Phyllis Twigg in December 1922 writing a radio drama called The Truth About Father Christmas for children, overlooked, I think because she's female, I think because she wrote for children, and I think because there's no surviving script. So I've lost at least 6 months of the last year or two looking into her. And I think the big moment for me was discovering her pen name via an Australian newspaper, and that pen name, realizing then that not only was she Britain's first radio dramatist, but she's also the world's first TV chef 14 years later. But because no one till now worked out that woman is also that woman, even her family didn't. They knew of the 2 pseudonyms, but they didn't know she was the first in those fields. So I've been overwhelmingly overjoyed to work with her family and sort of bring the story of their great grandmother to them and just link up those. She's the only person to have done a first thing in radio and television. So Phyllis Twigg / Moira Main deserves a whole lot more credit. And
absolutely. She sounds like a phenomenal woman, and being a first, especially at that time when men were going off to war and women were supposed to keep things at home burning and keep the coal fires burning and things like that, and the old wartime songs. So what an amazing kind of journey she went on.
Well, there's loads and loads of female pioneers, especially at the very start in the 20s, who because the BBC, when it came along, brand new idea, and not but also I should say the BBC origin story. It's not just the origin story of the BBC as we know it, but it's broadcasting as an idea. It's the very idea of what we're doing in this room can be heard at home, and America was doing it about the same time. But really, the British broadcasting model was then sent all over the world, but it sort of began here in Chelmsford, really, and loads of women at the start. It was really then only in the 30s, I think, once it got a bit more bigger and formalized, that actually a lot of men started pushing the women out, unfortunately. So I think go back to the 20s. That's why I'm particularly fascinated with that early decade, as well as the fact they couldn't record anything for the first 10 years. So I think my other fascination with that is like 1922 to 32. Can we recreate those sounds and give us a flavour of what it was like to hear that whole lost decade of radio? That's a passion, I think, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, speaking of hearing things for the first time, one of the greatest little bits which you uncovered in the podcast is the story of Captain Ian Fraser. Just give us a little bit of an insight as to who he was and why he was important.
Yeah, so Ian Fraser, who set up the he lost his sight, we should first of all say, in the Battle of the Somme, and he did a couple of things. My way into him really was the fact that I was looking into the first London broadcast, which if you Google London broadcast and when it began, it would generally tell you, the BBC, London 2LO, BBC began in November 1922, and there's sort of experimental broadcasting from May that year. But actually, the year before that, when broadcasting was actually banned, there was this one guy, Captain Ian Fraser, who had lost his sight by that point, and he was working with St Dunstan's. He was chairman of St Dunstan's, who were there really to support those soldiers who'd come back from the war, lost their sight. And so in 1921, there's no such thing as radio broadcasting. They'd done some experiments the year before. The government thought it was too out of control, so they banned it. So in 1921, pretty much the only broadcast was Captain Ian Fraser, who, for charity, to raise money for St Dunstan's, and if I'm honest, to raise awareness for the idea of radio, because it had been banned, He wanted people to realise that actually you can really reach people, especially those who have lost their sight, for example, who just can't see, that actually audio is golden for these people. So he staged this one-day event that you pay a shilling and you get 5 minutes with a headset on, and you'd be listening to a comedy troupe about a mile away performing in front of the microphone. It's called the Co-Optimists. It included Stanley Holloway, who played Eliza Doolittle's dad in My Fair Lady. Other than that, people we wouldn't really have heard of today. But yeah, so you pay a shilling, you get 5 minutes of listening time, a bit like those HMV headphones that people might remember
those, yeah.
Listen to a bit of that favourite track. So it was all his ideas. So he gave us the first London broadcast. But before that as well, he gave us the first audiobook. He loved poetry and he missed reading poems. So he created this kit that could record using the same technology as recording gramophone music records. He was giving us the first audiobook. So we have all that to thank him for. And that's just this one person, really, Captain Ian Fraser.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much for sharing that. I know so many people will enjoy hearing about Captain Ian Fraser. Your podcast is slowly approaching its 100th episode.
It is.
Are you going to be stopping at 100 to tie in with the title of BBC Broadcasting Century?
Absolutely not. No, I think I've got the next sort of 200 episodes planned out already, and only this week I've been researching this wonderful Cornish drama, the first drama on location on the BBC, a nativity play called Bethlehem that was on. It was so popular. It was on the BBC 1926, and they repeated it every year till 1934. But when I say repeat, they couldn't record, so they had to restage it every Christmas, live from a church in Cornwall, with a cable stretching a mile over farmland, and the king loved it. George Bernard Shaw came down to watch, and it was this incredible. So it's stories like that I just love researching, love retelling, and occasionally love recreating where we can.
Can you imagine running a mile-long cable over farmland? You wouldn't hear of it today, would you?
I know.
It's bonkers.
In December in the snow, and also all of the villagers who played these parts of the nativity play from this church, there's a church nativity play broadcast out the nation, but they didn't have radio in Cornwall at this point. So none of them had heard radio, and yet they became radio stars overnight. So that's just lovely, isn't it? I think it's
bizarre. It's like, I love that. It's such a nice story. Now, Paul, Christmas is coming. We can't ignore that. We are in December. I know you're out and about currently with your Comedians and Carols tour. If anybody wants to come and see you, tell us what it is and what happens. I don't want to reveal it too much. I want you to give us a sense because it is great and I love it so much.
Oh, bless you. Very kind of you. Yeah, I'm all over the place, over the land, over the next few weeks. So every December we do this, and it's a show called Comedy and Carols. And it's either me as a one-man show doing comedy with some sing-along carols, but with a twist, carols, but with a comedic twist. So we do Silent Night to the tune of Postman Pat, for example. That works incredibly well. Or other things like that. But sometimes we have other comedians as well. So I will compare and introduce 1, 2, 3 other comedians. But yeah, lots of good little carolings, sing-alongs, some mince pies normally, a bit of mulled wine maybe if you're lucky. So we're all over the place. paulkerensa.com/gig guide is where you can find that, or indeed comediansandcarols.com is the other website, and that will list everywhere that we are at between now and Christmas.
Fabulous. And what is it that you love so much about Christmas, Paul? Because we'll get onto the book in a second, but what is it you love about Christmas?
I think I'm fascinated by it. I think when I say I love it, I don't love every element of it because it's stressful, it's busy, it's bonkers. It comes around far too quickly every year, and it's too commercial, obviously. But then there are reasons behind all of those things, and I think that with the history hat on, I'm kind of fascinated by that. And you can go back to the Dickensian Victorian sort of era, but even then they were looking back to the Tudor era or the Georgian era and going, oh, it's not as good as it used to be. So I think we've always had this thing with Christmas looking back at least 100 years going, oh, but they got it right. How do we get what they had at Christmas? So right now we look back at the Dickensian time or whatever, but Dickens was looking back to them, the Tudors look back to the Middle Ages and so on, But part of that then, and tying back in with the faith thing as well, of course, is that in the Victorian times, you've got people like Charles Dickens, who was a Christian, wasn't a big fan of the church at the time, but he was a Christian. He was influenced by a guy called Washington Irving, American writer who wrote Rip Van Winkle and Sleepy Hollow, but he also wrote down stories of St. Nicholas flying over the rooftops and things like that. And Washington Irving also visited England and saw that we weren't really celebrating Christmas much in the early 1800s. So Washington Irving wrote all these stories about how wonderful and rosy and cozy the English Christmas is, even though it wasn't. And then Dickens reads that, is influenced, writes a Christmas Carol, writes about snowy Christmases, all of that sort of stuff, mulled wine, presents, food. So all of that is from just kind of a handful of people who are Christians, who are trying to get us back to some sort of celebration this time of year. So we're still trying to get back to the right celebration. We never get it right, but we persist.
No, but it's important to try. And of course, all of these wonderful stories are in your Christmas book called Hark, the Biography of Christmas. And I guess the inspiration behind that, I think it's quite obvious. You've biographized, is that a word? I don't think it is.
Let's go with it.
We'll go with it. You've biographized the whole of Christmas into a book in Hark. I've heard it, I've listened to it, I've read it. It's a wonderful book. How long did it take you to write?
I think on and off, probably, let's call it a year. Let's call it a year. Let's call it a day. But I was the weird guy in Guildford Library in the height of a heat wave in summer, taking out all the Christmas books that I could find and researching winter festivals and all of these things. So I've got a bookshelf downstairs of Christmas books. I must have got 30 or 40 or something, I don't know. And it continues. I'm thinking of actually revisiting it and drawing out some of those stories like I just mentioned about Dickens and Washington Irving and Prince Albert, bringing the German influence and just zooming in on some of those individuals who seem to have changed so much to do with the modern Christmas. So yeah, it took a while and it's ongoing, one could argue as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just because the book's out, doesn't have to finish there, does it?
No, absolutely. Christmas continues forever. And now I don't want to ask you what your favorite Christmas story or fact is from the book, because Paul will be back with us on Christmas Day for the edition of Reflections and sharing that along with Torch Trust CEO Sarah Dawkins and Torch trustee Tony Brown, who will share a special sermon especially for Christmas, along with lots of Christmas music too. And Paul. But if you'd like your copy of the book or audio book ahead of Christmas, where's the best place to get that, Paul?
Oh, anywhere that you buy books. Hark, the Biography of Christmas. It's probably not in stock anyway, so you have to order it. So just get online and, Hark, the Biography of Christmas, Paul Kerensa, and merry reading. God blesses everyone.
And of course, Christmas isn't just about presents under the tree. It's a chance to celebrate the birth of Christ. And the clue's in the title there. But how do you and your family spend Christmas, Paul?
In a variety of ways, in a variety of a mad Christmas rush beforehand. And obviously I'm on the road a lot. So it's really about the 23rd of December. We finally stop. We always have a nice Christmas Eve. We've taken that from the German influence, where Christmas Eve is very special. And we do a little drive around, look at the local lights on the different houses and things. We've got the crib service at church. My children are normally involved as, shepherds or donkeys or whatever in that. Last couple of years I've preached on Christmas Day morning, so I think I get a year off this year. I do preaching at my local church as well, but that's always very, very special. And I think, turkey and all the trimmings, all that sort of stuff, really, isn't it? And then collapse, Boxing Day onwards is just like recover, for a few days and play with the wrapping.
Yes, absolutely. Paul, we can't let you go without asking about what you're working on right now. Are there any projects in the pipeline you're allowed to share with us?
Well, mostly it's broadcasting history, and that's not just the podcast, but I'm writing a novel about it. I am writing a drama about it for next Christmas, which will be out in some format of which I'm unable yet to say, but something. And a film script on that as well, which I'm hoping that will be is just throw it out into the universe and see what happens. As well as that, we're doing Not Going Out, the Lee Mack sitcom. We're writing series 14 of that as we speak. I'm as amazed as anyone that it's still going, but it is, and I'm glad of it. And then life on the road, basically. So gigging, touring, etc.
Nice. Well, Paul, thank you so much for being with us here on Reflections from Talks Trust. We'll look forward to hearing you once more on Christmas Day with your favourite story from your book, Hark. But before we let you go, is there anything we can be praying for you?
Health, I think. Let's go with health, and not just me. My aging parents are aging. That's what they do, isn't it? It's what we all do. But so that's been a challenge lately, and I've had some health things this year as well, which we're riding through and we're recovering from all right. But you never know what's around the corner, do you? So for me, for all of us, just let's navigate that the best we can. I think that's always you can only control what you can control. The rest of it we have to just respond and react to in the best way possible, don't we? But it's a challenge, those crises. So yes, pray for navigating those crises as best as we can. I think will be good.
Paul Kerensa, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Reflections from Torch Trust.
Our thanks to Paul Kerensa for sharing his story with us this week on Reflections. Paul's Comedians and Carols is currently touring around the UK, and his book Hark, the Biography of Christmas, which you heard him chat about, is available in all the usual places, and available too on Daisy, Braille, and in various large print versions, exclusively for blind and partially sighted people. Well, that's just about it for this week. If you want to find out more about the Torch Trust and the work it's doing to support people with sight loss across the UK, you can call the team on 01858 438 260, and they'll be only too happy to help in any way that they can, whether that's helping to find Bible resources, audio, Braille, or just some more information about sight loss friendly churches. Just give them a call. That number once more is 01858 438 260. And on the 17th of December at 7:30 in the evening, it's a Tuesday, you can come in on YouTube to my Celebration Christmas concert. If you want to find the link, go to our website, which is mbm-ministries.org. Hope you can join us. Well, you can also join me next week when we'll hear on Reflections from social media starlets and theologians Jade and John Reynolds talking about their book, Able to Laugh. So from me, Marilyn Baker, God bless.
Reflections from Torch Trust.